أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد نبي ورسول. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and good evening to all of our guests. Thank you for joining us for another live broadcast with the Prince George's County Muslim Council. For those who are not as familiar with us, PGCMC has been around since 2008, and we are a political civic organization whose mission is to get the Muslim community engaged in the civic and political affairs of the county, the purpose of which is to facilitate our way of life, as well as improve the quality of life for all residents of the county. So we thank you very much for joining us. Tonight we have a very special guest. And, just to also make it clear to people to understand that where we are coming from when we talk about facilitating our way of life, we are an organization that is faith-based, meaning that we bear witness to Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. There is no deity, none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is the last prophet and messenger of Allah, and we do our best to live our life in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah, and that is consistent with our political work, our political and our civic work, about helping our neighbors and getting the best possible policies to facilitate our way of life, as well as improve the community. So tonight we have a very special guest with us. We will be having with us as our guest tonight, Representative Anthony Brown, who represents the 4th Congressional District of Congress in Maryland. He began serving his first term in Congress on January 3rd, 2017. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee, and he's also a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, as well as Veterans Affairs. In 1998, Congressman Brown was first elected to the Maryland House of Delegates to represent Prince George's County, and for 8 years he was Lieutenant Governor under Martin O'Malley. He's a retired colonel in the United States Army, and his military career has spanned more than a quarter of a century. So we're talking about somebody who's bringing a lot of experience to the table. He's a graduate of Harvard College, as well as Harvard Law School, and he resides with his wife and children in Largo, Maryland. It is my honor to introduce Congressmember Anthony Brown. Congressman, why don't you give us a few minutes about some of your priorities, some background on you, and your priorities in the 117th Congress.
Absolutely. First of all, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
To everyone, Jamil, I want to thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for inviting me this evening. And I really, really appreciate your leadership of the Prince George's County Muslim Council. And I admire, respect, and encourage the important work of the council, as you mentioned and you described, encouraging, promoting, supporting political and civic engagement in an effort to improve the quality of life for all residents. And what I've been committed to my entire life is the equality of treatment, of opportunity, dignity and respect for all. So the work of the council is extremely important in promoting those goals. This has been a tough year, and that's probably the biggest understatement of the year, if not the decade. We started the 117th Congress with a new administration. We're excited about the Biden-Harris administration, and I think they're properly focused where the focus needs to be at this moment in our country's history. Little more than a year ago, this pandemic changed our country in ways unimaginable and perhaps foreseeable by those who study pandemics and viruses and the like, but for most unimaginable and unforeseeable. We've witnessed the loss of 550,000 Americans, including more than 8,000 Marylanders, the loss of too many jobs and too many families struggling, and too many businesses have closed. The Muslim community has continued to step up to assist those in need during these difficult times. This month, This past month, we passed the American Rescue Plan into law. A lot of attention has been focused on that, a $1.9 trillion plan. And it provides, I believe, a lifeline for our nation because it prioritizes defeating the pandemic, crushing the virus, and getting families back on their feet, and providing the kind of economic support that families and businesses and local government need. The plan is going to expand our effort to get vaccines not only quickly, but equitably in the arms of every American. And as you know, Maryland has struggled with the disorganized and fragmented vaccination strategy. Too many Marylanders are frustrated and confused. They're stuck on wait lists. The president is committed to expanding vaccination, while we have a governor in Maryland, unfortunately, who's focusing speed over equity. And as a result, too many of our communities have not been prioritized in the vaccination allotment, with the impact being particularly felt by Prince George's County and communities of color. But the American Rescue Plan is going to put significant funding behind a national vaccination program, with more money to set up community vaccination sites. We saw the massive site at Six Flags, and now you're starting to see the availability in pharmacies and the Wayne K. Carter Sports and Learning Complex, and you'll see more and more of that. A lot of that made possible by the American Rescue Plan. And again, the focus is not just on speed, but on equity and addressing the disparities that we particularly see in communities of color. We also invest considerably more to expand testing, because we're not out of the woods, and contact tracing needed to beat the pandemic. This plan, the American Rescue Plan, also puts families at the forefront of our efforts. New direct payments of $1,400 to individuals. That's on top of the $600 in December, the $1,200 last May. We also increased the child tax credit, $3,000 for children under 17, $3,600 for children under 6. And many economists believe that this move, these tax credits, could cut child poverty in half. The bad news is they're only good for a year, so we've got to come back next year and extend that. We also expand the earned income tax credit for more low-wage workers. We provide more money to help renters and homeowners keep a roof over their heads, and we extend and strengthen unemployment benefits through September. The plan also includes an unprecedented investment to help safely reopen our schools. And we know that in Prince George's County, in just a few short days, I think it's April 8th, our schools are going to open, and we want to make sure that they open safely. So the funding for these schools, they can be used for a lot of things: reducing class sizes, improving ventilation, providing personal protective equipment for students and educators. The money can be used to hire counselors to support students as they transition back into the classroom. And the money can also be used to close the digital divide and provide summer school or other support for students that will help make up lost learning time. And we've seen a lot of that over this past year. The plan also provides crucial support for the hardest hit small businesses. And I know you've heard a lot about the payroll protection plan and the other loan and grant programs through the Small Business Administration. Also, a core pillar of the American Rescue Plan is a significant investment or support and funding for states, counties, and localities. They're the ones that pay for teachers, first responders, firefighters, and the like. Congress is starting to work on an ambitious plan to build back better, and we believe that this American Rescue Plan is a big piece of that. It's an historic investment also in rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, because some of the funds in the American Rescue Plan can be used for infrastructure. The House has already passed several pieces of key legislation that I've supported, been a priority for mine long since, before this pandemic. Police accountability. We passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to fundamentally transform policing. We passed bills to strengthen gun laws, close loopholes, and expand background checks to address gun violence in our country. We passed out of the House legislation to strengthen our democracy and protect the right to vote for every American. And we passed 2 immigration bills that would establish a path to citizenship for millions. It's a step toward comprehensive immigration reform that our country needs. And I certainly applaud President Biden and Vice President Harris for ending the former administration's bigoted travel ban on individuals from Muslim majority countries and discontinuing that wasteful spend on a border wall. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, as Jamil mentioned, I am committed to serving our men and women who've served us in uniform, and I will continue to push for policies to foster diversity and inclusion within the ranks and among our veteran community. We're making progress towards recovery. 3 safe and effective vaccines are being administered throughout this country. President Biden announced that the U.S. will have enough vaccine for every adult by the end of May, but we have to remain vigilant until everyone's vaccinated or we get to that sufficient threshold for herd immunity. Social distancing, hand hygiene, all those CDC protocols have to stay in place. So thanks for giving me an opportunity to give you both an overview of the American Rescue Plan, some of the things that we've already accomplished to date in the House at least, and some of my priorities on Capitol Hill. And I'll turn it back over to you, Jamil.
Thank you, Congressman. Very much appreciate that. And I think you kind of partially answered a lot of the first question in regards to the American Rescue Act. I mean, it was really a great job. Matter of fact, I may ask the question a little bit differently then. We were able to get the $1 trillion bill passed. You mentioned a number of ways that it can be used. Talk to us about, if you have the number, how much money is coming into the state of Maryland, maybe any discussions that you may have had with the county executive or members of the council or the governor on specifically, like the bill you mentioned, how it can be spent. If you have any specifics on how it's going to be spent in Maryland, Prince George's County, and how difficult it was. Some people, I often get asked questions as a former Hill staffer myself about the process of passing legislation. And so if you want to talk about the amount, how it may be spent in Maryland and the county, and how difficult it was, maybe a little inside on getting this large bill passed when we know we had a lot of opposition from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle from you.
Sure, and I'll start with that, and then I'll kind of hone in on kind of the dollars, how much, and where they're going. Look, this was really difficult. Think back in May of last year, the CARES Act, that was $2.6 trillion. That was larger than what we did. But there was bipartisan agreement. We were in crisis, and we passed some really important things to help businesses and individuals. We didn't do much for state and local government, but that was bipartisan. And then in December, we did close to $1 trillion of additional relief, unemployment insurance, another round of direct cash assistance. And that one was not, technically it was bipartisan, but we didn't have nearly the number of Republicans supporting it. This round, it was pretty much a straight party line vote. And we had to use a process called reconciliation, where in the Senate, they can pass legislation with a simple majority, 50 plus 1. So there's 50 Democrats. Vice President Harris came in. She cast that tie-breaking vote, and we passed the $1.9 trillion straight party line vote. We're still in crisis. The money is still necessary, but it was a straight party line vote. $350 billion are going to go to states and localities, tribes, and territories. So what does that mean? That's a big number. The distribution of the money is based on a modified version of the community development block grant formula. It's important for people to understand that when you send a large volume of money from Washington to states, to counties, to cities and communities, you don't create a lot of new programs because it would just be overwhelming. So most of the money that we're sending goes to existing programs and formulas, with a few exceptions. One of them is the payroll protection program, which we did create for small businesses. But everything else, for the most part, goes to existing programs. So the state and local government is going through a modified version of the Community Development Block Grant Program, $350 billion. Well, what does that mean? That's a big number. For Maryland, it's a little over $6 billion. That's a sizable chunk of change. For Prince George's County, it's about $180 million. Again, a fairly sizable amount. Now, some people say, well, wait a second, Prince George's got 170, almost 180 million. Baltimore City got over 600 million. that difference between medium and large metropolitan areas and counties, it wasn't just a Baltimore, Prince George's thing. We saw that throughout the country. Again, it's based on formulas that are in place, and we're just increasing the volume of money, and that's the way that it worked out. But I've been working with the county executive, Angela Alsobrooks. I've also been on the phone with Stuart Pittman and his team to talk about how the funds can be used. They can use the funds through December 31st of 2024. So there's no sort of let's hurry up and spend it maybe in a wasteful way. They can be very deliberate in how they use it. They can use it to respond, obviously, to the public health emergency and the negative economic impacts. So whether that's assistance to households or small businesses and nonprofits, or they can provide aid to specific impacted industries such as tourism or hospitality. There's a host of things that they can do. They can also provide a premium pay, additional pay to workers who are considered essential workers through the pandemic. Now, I must admit, I have not been hearing a lot of that use of the money, but they are able to do that. They can replace any lost revenue or delayed revenue as a result of COVID-19, which really means they can use it for almost anything. And they can also, as I kind of said at the top of my remarks, they can use it for investments in some infrastructure like water and sewer and broadband. Now, my conversations with Angela Alsobrooks, I think you will see investments in trying to close that digital divide. You're going to see a lot of investments to make sure that our schools are safe. A big unmet need in Prince George's County. So you'll see a lot of money going into rental assistance and homeowner assistance. There are some families in this pandemic that, let me back up. I thought the president did a really good job, very authentic when he described about 2 weeks ago in his speech that we've all lost something in this pandemic. We really have, and some have lost a lot more than others. Some have literally lost family members and loved ones. Some have lost jobs and businesses. And when it comes to housing, there are people that simply are unable to make the mortgage or pay the rent. That's not true for every family, but it is for a lot. And we get a lot of requests in my office for assistance. So I'm really emphasizing this point because everyone should understand that there's a lot of money now available to the county that they are going to use to help people who cannot make the rent or cannot make the mortgage, because that CDC moratorium on evictions is still in place. So those are some of the things that you can spend it on, Jamil. Those are some conversations I've had with the county executive on where they intend to spend the money.
Thank you, Congressman. Very appreciated. And I will tell our audience two things. That one's if they have a question they want to ask the member, they can send that through YouTube or Facebook, depending on whichever channel they are watching. But also that we will send out information to our community as the money begins to filter through, and the county makes various programs available. We have in the past with the restaurant fund and the hotel fund and what's happening to vaccinations. We'll continue to send that information out so people can access it. Next question, you're a member of the House Transportation Committee. We understand that the next bill they're going to be working on will probably also be done under reconciliation, will be a member of the, a major infrastructure bill. As a member of the committee, what infrastructure projects do you plan on fighting for to benefit Prince George's County?
Well, thanks for that question. And look, infrastructure should not have to go by reconciliation because infrastructure has traditionally been a bipartisan priority. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we know that America, and in our case, Maryland, and quite frankly, Prince George's County, we're slipping behind when it comes to investments in infrastructure. The American Association of Engineers gives the country a D- in infrastructure. So we're going to do a major infrastructure package, and the president is committed to doing that. There are going to be two components. One is going to be physical infrastructure, right? We think about roads, rails, bridges. It'll be airports and seaports. It'll be broadband. It'll be clean water and wastewater. But there's also going to be an investment in human capital. right? That's for the workforce training. If we're going to pivot to a green economy and if we're going to acknowledge that this pandemic has displaced so many workers, businesses that have closed that may never open again, new opportunities, creating new businesses and industry sectors, we're going to have to train and retrain. So there's going to be a human capital investment as well, workforce training, healthcare, and things like that. And the two guiding principles of the Biden administration are going to be equity and climate. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that. Let me talk about my priorities. And there are two buckets of priorities. One is sort of on the policy side, and the other is sort of on the money or project side. Let me talk a little bit about policy first. Transit. Transit's always been a big priority for me. I think it's an equity issue. You have a higher percentage of communities of color, low-income workers and families rely on public transit. So we need to make sure we're investing in WMATA, the bus system, the rail system. So my priority is to extend for another 10 years the federal commitment to WMATA, $1.73 billion. That's $173 million a year for 10 years for WMATA. And that will match what Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia have done. Big priority. Another priority for me is safe routes to school. You don't have to, venture out of a whole lot of neighborhoods to appreciate the fact that we don't have we don't have sidewalks and other pedestrian corridors for our kids to get from home to the bus stop on a sidewalk, get from home to school if they're walking safely. So one of my policy priorities is to put more money into that program and to modify the program so that the counties have more flexibility in creating safe routes to school. Another one of my priorities, policy priorities, is more transit-oriented development. We need more of that in Prince George County. We've got all these metro stations, and if you look at like Northern Virginia and Montgomery County, they've done a lot of commercial development around their metro stations, commercial retail, commercial office, some residential. We're way behind in Prince George County. New Carrollton is starting to pick up a little steam. The Prince George's Plaza, a little bit of development there, but some more federal money can assist in the planning of TOD. And right now, under current law, federal dollars cannot be used for TOD planning. I got a bill in. One of my transportation infrastructure priorities is to allow federal dollars to be used for that planning. Prince George's would benefit greatly. Another policy priority that may not necessarily be associated with infrastructure, but it does come out of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and that is I've looked at what they're doing at the University of Maryland College Park. They have this fantastic program that where they do research and training on implicit bias in local police departments, and they use 3D technology, virtual technology to put police officers through training programs so they can identify where their biases are and how they can de-escalate situations. So one of my policy priorities is establishing a program where dollars are available to local police departments to adopt this training program to use throughout the country to address implicit police bias. So those are some of my policy priorities. In terms of projects, I did mention WMATA in terms of dollars. The purple line, we need to continue to make sure that dollars are there. Governor Hogan has fumbled that one. It's been derailed. It's at a work stoppage right now, and I want to make sure that the federal government doesn't claw back the dollars that we already gave Maryland because of Hogan's mismanagement of that project. So that's going to also be a top priority of mine. I sat down with the Prince George's County executive and the county, Anne Arundel County executive, because earmarks are coming back, and I'm asking them for what are your priorities. I know some of the priorities in Prince George County are the interchange at the Greenbelt on 495 on the Beltway. I know the interchange at Pennsylvania Avenue and Suitland Parkway is a priority, but those project priorities, I think, need to come from local government, county government, because they're closest to the communities and can truly appreciate where the needs are. So my priorities will be their priorities because I assume that their priorities are the community's priorities.
Thank you, Congressman. Matter of fact, you just answered one of the questions that came in through the chat, which was it the status of the purple line? So you basically just answered that question. So thank you. Our next question is going to come from Hina Zuberi of Justice for All. Go ahead, Sister Hina. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
The catchphrase of 2021,
That's right.
alone in 21 either. Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you, Assalamualaikum, Brother Jamil. My question is about the fall of democracy in Burma. And you're on the, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. So I just wanted to talk about what can we do to get a global arms embargo against the genocidal military of the genocidal Burmese military. This is they're asking for a right to protect. People, protesters are being killed on the streets, and we had been warning 8 years, 12 years almost, that this genocidal army killed the Rohingya. They will kill their own people. What can we do to get a global arm embargo?
So let me start by saying that as a member of the Armed Services Committee, and where I focus on military policy, it is important for me to understand the global context in which we deploy our military and we support nations around the world to protect their security, their interests. When it comes to Burma and the genocidal Burmese military, I strongly condemn the brutal violence against that. At the outset, what we've been seeing, the killing of peaceful protesters and students, workers and labor leaders, and even children has shocked the conscience of the international community. And these actions are a direct assault on the country's transition to democracy and the efforts of the Burmese people to achieve a peaceful and prosperous future. Now, the House passed a resolution condemning the military coup. And I supported that. And I also support the actions by the Biden administration. And they've done a number of things. The suspension of all U.S. engagement with Burma under a trade and investment framework agreement of 2013. Also, the Department of Commerce, which I support this action, to impose new export controls on Burma. And the Commerce Department added 4 Burmese entities to the list in response to the military coup and the violent crackdown. So we have to continue to work with our allies and partners and like-minded institutions for the immediate restoration of democracy and hold those who seize power accountable. It's just unacceptable. And we've got to stand up for something. And I've joined my colleagues in Congress and support the Biden administration in the steps that we've been taking so far.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Thank you, Sister Hina. And we'll continue working with the representatives and your organization toward those human rights issues. Because even, again, when it comes to the issue of concern about our neighbors, yes, we have those locally, but we have our world neighbors that we have to look out for too. Next question, Congressman. Right now the trial of the police officer that killed George Floyd is taking place. It's been underway for the past couple of days. Since the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, there's been a movement toward racial equity and justice. Much of it has focused on economic opportunity for the underserved. How do we make sure that the infrastructure project and other policies that come out of the 117th Congress help to address these issues and create a more equitable society?
Sure. Let me start by saying this also. I mean, last year was we faced multiple crises. One, a pandemic created by the novel coronavirus, and number two, a virus just as pernicious and deadly, has been around a lot longer than the novel coronavirus that has taken far too many lives, particularly those of people of color, particularly young black men, black and brown men, and that's the virus of racism. And after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Audrey Marbury, I mean, there was a reckoning with race in this country, and I think more and more people saw what so many of us already not only are aware of, but have experienced and lived with, and that's the disparities and inequities that exist, whether in our classrooms, our health system, the labor market, certainly when it comes to public safety and policing. That's just racial disparities. And so I'm really pleased that in the Congress and again in the administration, there's this really big focus on equity. Are the decisions we make making those gaps and disparities worse, or are we narrowing them and ensuring that every American has an opportunity in this country? So on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, we're incorporating those principles of equity as well. The way that we invest in transportation and infrastructure, we know it has a profound impact on equity. And for too long, transportation decisions have negatively impacted communities of color, low-income communities, and people with disabilities. So in HR 2, which is the surface transportation piece of that infrastructure package, we call it the Moving Forward Act, it helps build a more just and equitable future, I believe, through strong requirements for investment in businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, dedicated resources to low-income communities, consideration of equity and environmental justice in funding decisions, and improve access for people with disabilities. So specifically, we reauthorized the U.S. Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. In Maryland, we call it our MBE program. We call it the DBE program. And that requires the states that receive federal funding to use at least 10% of those funds under the highway, transit, and innovation titles of the bill with small businesses owned and controlled by minority and women-owned companies. We also create a demonstration grant to provide for a reduced fare for low-income riders on transit to help close that transit equity gap. We've done a few other things in the infrastructure bill that you'll see, establishing a broadband benefit program that entitles households with a member who qualifies either for the Lifeline program or the free and reduced school lunch program, or if they're recently unemployed, they'll receive a $50 per month benefit that they can use towards internet service. So there are a lot of things included in that. And then, of course, I should mention for the first time, $100 billion to support long-term improvements in public school facilities. And the federal government usually doesn't get into that area, public school facilities. So we think that's going to go a long way, particularly in a county like Prince George's County. We have too many children being educated in trailers that were supposed to be temporary, but they've been there almost as long as I've been alive. So those are some of the things that we're doing to address equity in infrastructure, both who gets to deliver it, who benefits from the public spend, and what communities benefit from the actual facilities that we're delivering.
Thank you, Congressman. Matter of fact, speaking of the business issues, our next question is actually going to come from Mamoon Ashkar, who is a business person in Prince George's County. Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, Congressman. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Jamil.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Mr. Congressman, my name is Mamoon Ashkar. I'm an Arab Muslim business owner of multiple towing companies in the Prince George's County, Riverdale community. I was a victim of discrimination by the Riverdale Police Department. This extended for several years and is still ongoing. I have lost multiple contracts with other police departments, municipalities, and recreational facilities due to Riverdale Police Department defaming and slandering my name. I've been called camel jockey, foreigner, criminal, and other names. This has been going on for 7 years, since 2014, and has currently reached the Court of Appeals and how to protect the Muslims from being discriminated against.
I think I heard the question was how will I protect the Muslim owners from being discriminated against? It was a little garbled. I think that's the question.
Yes, sir.
Look, I strongly condemn discrimination of any kind, whether it's race, ethnicity, religion, orientation, or identification. And it shouldn't be tolerated ever in our communities. The good news is we no longer have a president that kind of made it all right for that discrimination. And I realize that the case that you mentioned predated President Trump, but certainly with his xenophobic, anti-Muslim words, actions, that sort of gave cover to a lot of this actions and discrimination. So that's the good news. But look, with or without Trump, it's imperative that we support our business owners, minority business owners, our small business owners, and I've been a strong advocate for minority-owned businesses for my entire years in public service. So I don't know the full history of your situation, but if you need assistance with casework, although it sounds like you're in court, but any assistance, and I offer this to you and all of those who are on this evening's town hall, call my office. And the number is 301-458-2600. It's 301-458-2600. The discrimination, the type that you're describing, shouldn't happen to anyone. And it's particularly pernicious, given that what it does, it undermines you as a business person. It's a violation of your dignity, and it puts you and all of us at a disadvantage. So give my office a call if we can be helpful.
I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mamoon. Appreciate it. And I hope everyone took down the congressman's number. Again, one of the things that he talked to me about when he first was elected was the importance of constituent services and making sure that people were served. They're there to represent you. I know he has a great district leader who I consider a friend, who's very organized for the county. So if you need assistance, definitely call his office, particularly with federal issues. Congressman, 4 years ago, you joined us for a town hall after our newly inaugurated President Trump made his first attempt to ban Muslims from several countries from entering the country. Now, fortunately, under President Biden, that very, hurtful and biased executive order has been negated, and now there's a proposal that you began to mention for a new immigration bill. What do you see as the priorities for the immigration bill, and what do you think of the prospects for passing?
Let me start by saying that immigration, the last time we saw a comprehensive immigration was, believe it or not, under Republican President Ronald Reagan I think it was in the early 80s. But there are so many components of immigration reform that has bipartisan support, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to move forward on it. Again, President Trump is gone. He was the biggest obstacle. So where are we now? So there's a bill, the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. It's a comprehensive bill. I'm original co-sponsor of the bill. It's supported by President Biden. And he, I guess, technically sent it to Congress as part of his commitment to modernize our immigration system. And the bill does a number of things. It creates a roadmap to citizenship for 11 million undocumented immigrants, providing dreamers and those on temporary protective status some farm workers with an expedited 3-year path to citizenship, and it gives all undocumented immigrants who pass background checks and pay taxes with an 8-year path to citizenship. That's one thing that's in there. It reforms the family-based immigration system, which has been one of the cornerstones of our immigration system. It reforms it to keep families together by recapturing visas from previous years to clear backlogs, including spouses and children of green card holders as immediate family members, and it increases the per country caps for family-based immigration. It also grows our economy by making changes to the employment-based immigration system, which is another pillar of our immigration laws, by eliminating per country caps, making it easier for STEM advanced degree holders from U.S. universities to stay. It improves access to green cards for workers in lower wage industries and giving dependents of H-1B holders work authorization themselves. And it prevents children of H-1B holders from aging out of the system. It does a number of things. It increases funding for immigrant integration initiatives. And you remember several years ago under the O'Malley-Brown administration, that was a big priority for us. It protects workers from exploitation. It also improves the E-Verify process. I know there's a lot of controversy around that process, but if we're going to have E-Verify, it ought to work, and it ought to work right. It also supports another one of those pillars, which I really think historically is what made America as exceptional as we are, and that's supporting asylum seekers and other vulnerable populations by eliminating the 1-year deadline for filing asylum claims. And it also reduces asylum application backlogs, and it increases certain visas that up to now have just been unavailable. So that's the comprehensive bill. I think it's going to be a heavy lift because comprehensive immigration is made so toxic by former President Trump. The House did pass the Dream and Promise Act, which established a lawful path to citizenship for permanent, or it's actually a lawful path to permanent resident status for Dreamers and for other people who are on temporary protected status, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the deferred enforcement departure. So we did pass that. But I'd say overall, it's going to be tough to pass any immigration reform. I think we have to take it in small bits and pieces, and only in that way do I think we have hopes of getting something passed on the Senate side.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Sister Harisa Muhammad.
Can't hear you,
Harisa.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Gotcha.
can. Thank you.
Good evening, Congressman Brown, and thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you, Brother Jamil, for moderating. I have a quick question about HBCUs. There are many Muslims in the DMV that are products of HBCUs, and HBCUs have an amazing record for producing Black PhDs and professionals. The Maryland State Legislature passed a $577 million bill to settle a lawsuit based on lack of support for Maryland HBCUs. So what support can the federal government provide for HBCUs as well?
Yeah, first of all, and thanks for the question. I don't know, are you an HBCU grad?
I'm not, but I do have a lot of friends who are.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of people that I work with who are. And kudos to the Maryland General Assembly. They passed the bill last year. The governor vetoed it. They came right back and they passed $577 million over 10 years. That's going to go a long way for, Coppin State University, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Bowie State University, and Morgan. So I'm really, really excited about that. A lot needs to happen at the federal government because I think it's a federal and state responsibility to make sure that our HBCUs not just survive, but that they thrive. In the American Rescue Plan, which we've been talking about this evening, it does provide about $40 billion for colleges and universities to help make up for lost revenue due to the pandemic, and it requires that institutions, all institutions, dedicate at least half of their funding for emergency financial aid grants to students to help prevent hunger and homelessness and other hardships. So that's for all universities and colleges. In the 116th Congress, Representative Alma Adams from North Carolina and we took the lead on a lot of HBCU-related legislation. One was the Capital Finance Debt Relief Act. It hasn't been passed into law. We're going to reintroduce it again. And that would require the Department of Education to cancel the obligation of historically Black colleges and universities to repay the balance of principal and interest due on their capital financing loans. That would go a long way. Many of these institutions just have a lot of difficulty making those payments. And we think it would be a good opportunity to kind of clean out the ledger a little bit and give them some breathing room to make investments in future facilities. We also supported, we were lead sponsors on the HBCU Partners Act, and that bill addresses the capacity of HBCUs to participate in federal programs. I didn't realize this before I was in Congress, but a lot of HBCUs that are not doing well in terms of relationships with federal agencies and grants and research dollars and stuff like that, a lot of them don't have the capacity. And so we want to build the capacity so they can effectively compete for grants and funding opportunities. So this bill requires agencies to regularly interact with HBCUs and to submit annual plans for how they will strengthen the capacity of historically Black colleges and universities to participate in these programs. Now, in the introduction, Jamil had mentioned that I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We've increased the dollars. We've almost tripled the dollars that go to historically Black colleges and universities from the DoD for STEM-related programs, whether it's research or basic science. But what we've also done is we directed the Department of Defense, the Secretary of the Department of Defense, who I should now, by the way, point out that it's Secretary Lloyd Austin, the first African-American Secretary of Defense. We directed the Secretary of Defense to commission a study that looks at building capacity among HBCUs, because HBCUs receive less than 0.5% of the R&D dollars spent by the federal government. That's crazy, because they produce, I think, something like 30% of the Black and brown STEM professionals in this country. So we want to increase capacity so we can increase the dollars that HBCUs can receive, because it's all competitive from the federal government. So those are some of the things that I've been working on. But again, kudos to the Maryland General Assembly, $577 million over 10 years. That's a really big step forward for HBCUs in Maryland.
Thanks, Congressman.
And let me just say, Congressman, that Sister Harissa is one of our really up-and-coming bright engineers. Matter of fact, she did an internship at Banneker Ventures, which is, as you know, one of the largest Black construction companies in this area. And I bring that up because this is someone who benefited from the 8A program. Mm-hmm. So when you have set-asides like that, it helps to grow minority businesses, and then it allows them to help put people like Sister Harissa onto her path for her career. So there's a multiplier benefit of doing these things. So that's
well, congratulations, and wish you the very best in your engineering career.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to ask a couple of audience questions, and I'll give 2 at a time since we have about 10 minutes left. And both of them are foreign affairs questions. And one is directly right up your alley in particular because you are on the armed services. So the question is, considering the volatility in the Middle East, some would even consider its current state a powder keg. Would you support the stop of U.S. military arms deals to the Middle East in order to promote peace?
You want me to take that one now? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And these are challenging issues because at first blush and initial consideration, it's a logical conclusion that, well, if you want to reduce conflict, then reduce the supply of arms that essentially enable that conflict. And that's true whether you're talking about small arms or whether you're talking about anti-ballistic missiles for offense or defensive capability. The challenge that you have is, and this is human nature, that goes back, this is human nature that through the history of the world, that nations and peoples supply arms and weapons of war to other nations and peoples. It has always been that way, and I personally believe that it will always continue to be that way. If you look at the history of the world. But that's not the end of the story. The question is not simply, do you support limiting arms sales, but what responsibilities do you attach to arms sales or, arms sales, providing weapons of war to nations? And that's where we have often fallen short as a nation, the United States. We should be insisting on and holding accountable our partners to whom we sell arms, a high standard for protecting human rights, a high standard for governments that, even if they're not democratic and reflect the U.S. democracy, and of course, as a side note, many people would question the strength of our democracy, but it's still, I would submit, the strongest democracy in the world. But we should be enforcing a liberal form of government, and by that I mean that respects the rule of law, that respects the court system, that protects individual basic and again I say human rights. That is not a provocative nation that uses arms in an impermissible way, but one that legitimately is protecting its rights, its interests, and its peoples. Now, I understand that that's a very general response. It's sort of like a value response without specifics. But again, where I start in the response to that question is if the answer to my question was yes, I support discontinued arms sales to the Middle East, believing that that's going to reduce violence in the Middle East, I think it would ignore what we would see from other nations who would continue to provide arms to other nations around the globe.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question is also foreign affairs. Would you support the call to Israel to become a member of the NPT? I assume that's the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, whose objective is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. I believe
first thing you have to do is to get Israel to acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons, because right now they are, I guess, so almost by global definition, not a nuclear power. But look, every nation that possesses a nuclear capability, and now we're talking about nuclear weapons grade capability, should be participating in and required to participate in the variety of non-proliferation negotiations, agreements, discussions that are had around the world. Unfortunately, we are as a global community, as a community of nations, we're in a worse place today than we've ever been when it comes to arms control and non-proliferation discussions. Under President Trump, we let an important the INF lapse. I understand the challenges with that. The question was about Israel, and yes, bringing Israel in. And then also the question is China. We need to bring China into any renegotiation, if you will, of an INF. So I'm all for nuclear non-proliferation. I'm all for including every nation in it that has weapons grades capability, on weapons grade nuclear capability. And I'm hopeful that the Biden administration is going to be moving out in that direction. I will say, related to that issue is the question of the United States nuclear capability. And you know that that's going to be one of the 2, 3, 4 most robust debates that we're going to have this year when it comes to passing the defense budget and the Defense Authorization Act. And that is, how much are we investing in the modernization of our nuclear triad, right? That's the bomber fleet, the submarine fleet, and the land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. It is an aging system. There's no doubt about it. I certainly believe that if you have a system, it should be modern. But I also do have concerns, because to modernize that system, it's about a $9 billion price tag. It takes up a big percentage. I think it may even be more than that. It may be 9% of the defense budget. That number 9 is somewhere, and wherever it is, it's a huge number. And I also have questions with the level of our nuclear inventory. How many nuclear warheads do you need? China is a nuclear capable nation, and their nuclear warheads number in the 100s. And they still have a nuclear deterrent, a strategic deterrent capacity. Ours number, I don't even know what the number is. It's the thousands. I mean, how many do you need? So that's going to be another debate that we have. I'm for modernization. How much are you going to modernize, and how quickly? And do we need an inventory as large as we have? All of those, I think we have to ask and answer. And I would weigh in on the side of, let's reduce the arsenal. And let's not overinvest in a modernization, when what we should really be doing is emphasizing a non-proliferation.
Thank you, Congressman. And I know we're getting ready to bump up against the hour, but one critically important question, and this brings it back to domestic politics. It was a very close race this past year in the presidency. You have, I will tell you, mentioned 3 states in particular that have very strong and active Muslim communities in it when it comes to political participation that were critical. So for instance, last year, the Muslim community engaged in a 1 million voter project to increase the amount of people engaged in the democratic process. You have very large Muslim communities in places like Michigan, where you won, Pennsylvania, particularly in the Philadelphia area, very large a very large and active Muslim community there. Georgia, obviously one of the most critical states, very large and active Muslim community in the Atlanta area, both economically and politically. I know a lot of the brothers that down there who are active, the brothers and sisters, down there who are very active. Now you have several states led by Republicans who are seeking to pass laws to restrict voting. It's like, if you can't convince the people to vote for you, then stop the ones who don't want to vote for you for voting at all. It's the return of Jim Crow, or as what's the name says, James Crow Esquire. Tell us about Congress's efforts to protect voting rights, and how we can assist, even though this is not an issue in Maryland. How can we in Maryland assist nationwide with making sure people have their voting rights?
We are at a extremely critical moment in our nation's history when it comes to voting rights. And what we're seeing, as you outlined, in states across the country, it was already in motion, and it was accelerated during the pandemic because of what we saw, which was voting by mail, extended early voting, and people came out in large numbers. And as a result, Joe Biden won. He won in states like Georgia and Arizona, where weren't even really expecting that. We were focused on the blue wall, where we won that as well. And as a result, you see an acceleration by Republicans to roll back access to the ballot. We don't experience that in Maryland because we've done a really good job. We've got good laws in place. We're willing to prosecute people that engage in voter suppression. We did it successfully a few years ago. So in Congress, we are working on legislation that will safeguard the right to vote, much like what we enjoy in Maryland. And it's called HR 1. It's the For the People Act. I'm a sponsor, a co-sponsor, but I got to give credit to John Sarbanes, Representative Sarbanes, who's been fighting this fight for democracy for a really, really long time. He's been in Congress, I think, 10 or 12 years. This is sort of one of his sort of trademark issues. The bill, which passed out of the House and it's sitting in the Senate, it expands and protects voting rights. It ends the big money dominance in politics. It also strengthens ethics laws across all three branches of government. But so what it does on the voting, it expands access to the ballot box by taking aim at some of the barriers to voting, like cumbersome voter registration systems, the limited hours in some states, the limited number of locations, the efforts now to purge voter rolls, the efforts to roll back the rights for those who've completed felony sentences, who we want to give them, we want to restore their voting rights. These states want to roll them back. HR 1 simplifies voting by mail. It also ends partisan gerrymandering. So the key thing is this: we've passed it in the House, and it's now sitting in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And Jamil, I'm sorry, Jamil, you mentioned Jim Crow. It was during the Jim Crow era that the filibuster, which requires 60 votes in the Senate for a bill to pass, okay, the filibuster was created or implemented to prevent the expansion of voting rights and civil rights in America. So if there ever was a time when we should end the filibuster, and, knock, Senator, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, now is your moment. Christine Sinema from Arizona, now is your moment to join your Democratic colleagues to do away with the filibuster, or at least limit it, so that when it comes to voting rights and civil rights legislation, we can pass law based on a simple majority. And it is so important that happen. And I do hope, and I encourage, I signed a letter last week asking President Biden to weigh in support of eliminating the filibuster. If we do, then HR 1, For the People Act, which passed the House, it will pass the Senate. It will go to President Biden for signature, and then all of those laws that we've been reading about in the last 2 weeks, Georgia, Michigan, elsewhere, they'll be repealed and abolished for the most part, and will be expanding access to the ballot and not rolling it back. I'm sorry for the long-winded response to your question, but that was certainly an important issue to address, because I just think the future of our democracy is at stake. The idea that in Georgia you can be held criminally liable, prosecuted for delivering food and water to a voter who's waiting online to vote. And it gets hot. It gets hot in Georgia, it gets hot in You got primaries in June, even elections in November. It can be hot. They're trying to criminalize that behavior. It's outlandish. So HR 1, all of your Maryland delegation, except for Andy Harris on the Eastern Shore, has supported it. So you should be lobbying Andy Harris. But if you've got friends, relatives, et cetera, in states, mostly with Republican senators, need to be lobbying them. But in Maryland, your representatives, your senators are in a good place on that. We need to be lobbying Republicans elsewhere in the country.
Certainly. And I would also say there are probably organizations just like Stacey Abrams in Georgia who helped bring about that victory, not only for Biden, but then for two senators, shortly thereafter. People often don't come out and vote twice, in 1 year.
That was huge. And to elect an African-American pastor and a young Jewish man in Georgia, I mean, folks turned out. And so Stacey, big kudos to her and the organizations that she's pulling together. So certainly, whether it's Stacy's group or another group, lending support to their effort is another way that you can participate in advocating and lobbying on Capitol Hill to essentially do away with the filibuster so we can get H.R. 1 passed into law.
Thank you, Congressman. And I'm going to thank you for your time and the very informative answers that you gave us on these issues. I know there's never enough time. There's always people who have more questions, but I want to also tell those people, thank them for listening and ask them to, the point of what we're doing here at Prince George's County Muslim Council, again, is to support our community, both as Muslims, but also simply as residents of Prince George's County and our neighbors. So, go to our website, www.pgcmc.org, donate, take a membership, but also offer your time and knowledge, and of course, offer your dua, your prayers for our success. We have a number of things coming up too. We're going to be working with the new, matter of fact, I just met the new police chief, Malik Aziz. So we're going to be working on an event with him to introduce him to the community. We have a Juneteenth program that's coming up, June 19th, to talk about the issues of equity. And, I know, Congressman, you're very involved. This is not a question because I know you got to go. But you were involved in the bill that former President Trump did not want to sign, which is going to rename Confederate bases that were named after Confederate soldiers. And Prince George's County has a similar effort going on there. So, we're going to be involved in that effort. Matter of fact, we already sent in some names of prominent Muslims that were in the area a long time ago, that for the county to consider. So I would tell it to our audience, be involved supporters. Definitely watch, ask your questions, but be involved supporters. And Congressman Brown, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, your office. And we, of course, will stay in touch and communication as we work together to improve the quality of life in Prince George's County for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And let me say in closing, although I know I'm 2 weeks early, Ramadan Mubarak. And
thank you very much.
Families in the community, well wishes to everyone. Thank you.
All right. And we're going to talk to you again about, you took on some young people as interns before in your office. We'll talk to you again about that.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Good night.